welcome back to the 12 Cards of Christmas. I'm Tracy with Bewitched Crafts, and today we are starting with a white daisy card base that measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. We're making a very different card today with a vintage look. So we're going to be using some gray inks. I've got heather and pewter here, as well as our distress oxide pumice stone. I'm going to start with a piece of Scarlet cardstock to cover the card front. So it is 5 1/2 by 4 1/4. And I'm just going to go ahead and stick that layer down with my Tombow tape runner. I'm going to cover the entire card front. And the next layer I want to use white daisy, but I need a little bit more interest. So I have used a stitched thin cut rectangle die to get this edge here. And it's going to layer in like this, but we're going to do quite a bit to it before we stick it down. So first what I'd like to do is to add some more vintage feel to this and get rid of this stark contrast. I'm going to bring some attention to the edges with heather ink. I'm going to sponge this ink on all the way around the edge. You could also use one of our daubers or a direct to paper method if you wanted to pick up the pad and put it straight down. This is the most subtle method in my opinion, and I'm going for subtle. So I'm really hoping you can see the transformation taking place here. I'm going over the stitches. I'm just kind of randomly dipping in, filling in some corners. So I've got some more here, it's darker there. Should be just the ticket to get rid of some of the stark contrast between the white daisy and the scarlet paper. So add as much or as little as you like. Okay, I'm going to set that ink aside and move on. We're using today the Winter Scene stamp set with this gorgeous tree. Now we're going to do something pretty special to this tree. First, I need to get a couple images down. I'm going to use pewter ink. Okay, so the block I've selected here, I need to be really careful that I don't get ghost outlines if I stamp over. I want to give the appearance of a number of trees and snowbanks, so I'm going to start actually by stamping off on one side. Just checking these edges, I don't want any ghosts. And I'm going to stamp just a small portion of the tree here at the top. Great. And I'm going to stamp a little bit more of the tree and towards the center over here, but not the whole tree. And now I've got one more image. And this time we will get the whole tree in there. Perfect. Now I'm also going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment. I've selected Noel. It's from the Comfort and Joy stamp set. And I'm working with pomegranate ink. If you have the new ink in Scarlet, it will be a perfect match. It's been on back order, so I'm using pomegranate, which I think also looks nice. And I'm going to put that up here. Great. And we'll move that aside. And we're going to create some snowbanks. Now I like to work with a template to make my snowbanks. If you are better at doing something by hand, by all means give it a shot. That's not my forte. So I have used our Fancy Borders Thin Cuts die to die cut an edge on a piece of White Daisy cardstock, and I'll be using that as my template to create snowbanks. I'm going to start kind of towards the middle and kind of near the bottom of one of the tree trunks. I'm going to use some purple repositionable tape to go ahead and tape this down so it does not shift. And I'll bring in our Distressed Oxide in Pumice Stone. I'm going back to my sponge. Again, you could use a dauber here. And I'm simply going to tap over the outline. And this is pretty subtle, but I think you're going to like the effect in the end. I'm going to move my template and I'm going to shift it over. Now I'm working near the bottom of this tree. And again, I'm going to tape it down, grab my sponge and go back into the pumice stone. Stamp over the edge, I'm sorry, tap over the edge. I'm going to come up here and get something kind of near the top. Again, I don't want things lined up exactly, so I'm just kind of shifting. Bring in some more ink. This is really going to tone down the starkness of the white and give this a much more vintage feel. And on the bottom, since I don't want to keep having the same patterns in the snow, I'm going to turn it over. And I'm almost going to, so rather than this, I'm going to kind of almost make them run together. I'll bring it down. Tape it down. And come back with some more ink. Okay. And now we have snowbanks. I do want to make one more finishing touch on this card. I want to add something pretty fancy. I need some more shine and texture on this card. And the way I'd like to do it is embossing, but I don't have a stamp to emboss the shape that I need. Instead, I'm using the Close to My Heart embossing ink pen. Comes in 3 different widths. This is the medium pen. And what I'm going to do is actually add silver to the end of each branch. So I'm coming in with my pen and I'm making a small circle everywhere I want the embossing powder to stick. So at the ends of each branch, I'm hoping you can see it on here. It does give you a light, almost pink purple mark to show you where you are. So you'll know exactly where you've applied embossing powder and embossing fluid. I'm going to do one tree at a time, and I'm going to bring in my coffee filter. My embossing powder. And cover those up. Tap that off. Okay, so you can see it's very clearly picked up embossing powder each place that I touch the pen. I'm going to add a few more. I do this in stages because I don't want any of this embossing ink to dry between trees. So I'm going to do one tree at a time. And I pretty much want this at the end of every branch. So I'm going to do quite a bit on this tree. Perfect. One more tree. Wow, I just touched that. Let's clean that up a little bit. This looks like a lot of work, but I promise you the payoff is incredible. And we're almost there. Just get a little more embossing powder on this tree. Tap that off. Okay, let me get these things out of the workspace, and I'm going to heat up my heat tool. Those of you who've been watching along know that I think it's best to let your heat tool heat up slightly before you start applying it to your project, and that you always want to apply it with your project up off of your mat so that air flows through. Keep your heat tool in constant motion and get ready for the transformation. Hoping the light is showing how that has all changed from a flat embossing powder to a raised shiny silver metallic. Okay, so we're just going to apply that to our card front. I'm going to use my Tombow adhesive. I'll use my mat to center it, press down. I think this card is very different from the other cards we've worked on in the series, and I love this vintage feel. I really appreciate you watching the 12 cards of Christmas videos, and I hope you'll come back again tomorrow to see what's new.